Isis Unveiled by Helena Blavatsky. Preface. The work now submitted to public judgment is the fruit of a somewhat intimate acquaintance with Eastern adepts and study of their science. It is offered to such as are willing to accept truth wherever it may be found and to defend it, even looking popular prejudice straight in the face. It is an attempt to aid the student to detect the vital principles which underlie the philosophical systems of old. The book is written in all sincerity. It is meant to do even justice and to speak the truth alike without malice or prejudice. But it shows neither mercy for enthroned error nor reverence for usurped authority. It demands for a spoliated past that credit for its achievements which has been too long withheld. It calls for a restitution of borrowed robes and the vindication of fabricated but glorious reputations. Toward no form of worship, no religious faith, no scientific hypothesis has its criticism been directed in any other spirit. Men and political parties, religious sects and schools are but the mere ephemera of the world's day. Truth, high-seated upon its rock of adamant, is alone eternal and supreme. We believe in no magic which transcends the scope and capacity of the human mind, nor in so-called miracle, whether divine or diabolical, if such imply a transgression of the laws of nature instituted from all eternity. Nevertheless, we accept the saying of the gifted author Festus, that the human heart has not yet fully uttered itself, and that we have never attained or even understood the extent of its powers. Is it too much to believe that humanity should be developing new sensibilities and a closer relation with nature? The logic of evolution must teach as much, if carried to its legitimate conclusions. If, somewhere, in the line of ascent from vegetable or ascidian to the noblest man a soul was evolved, gifted with intellectual abilities, it cannot be unreasonable to infer and believe that a faculty of perception is also growing in man, evolving, enabling us to descry facts and truths even beyond our ordinary wisdom. Yet we do not hesitate to accept the assertion of Buffet that, quote, "the essential is forever unchanged. Whether we cut away the marble inwards that hides the statue in a block, or we pile stone upon stone outward until the temple is completed, our new result is only an old idea. The latest of all the eternities will find its destined other half-souls in the earliest." End quote. When, years ago, we first traveled over to the East, exploring the penetralia of its deserted sanctuaries, two saddening and ever-recurring questions oppressed our thoughts. Where, who, and what is God? And who ever saw the immortal spirit of humanity so as to be able to assure himself of our immortality? It was while most anxious to solve these perplexing problems that we came into contact with certain men, endowed with such mysterious powers and such profound knowledge that we may truly designate them as the sages of the Orient. To their instructions we lent a ready ear. They showed us that by combining science with religion, the existence of God and immortality of man's spirit may be demonstrated like a problem of Euclid. For the first time we received the assurance that the Oriental philosophy has room for no other faith than an absolute and immovable faith in the omnipotence of humanity's own immortal self. We were taught that this omnipotence comes from the kinship of man's spirit with the universal soul, God. The latter, they said, can never be demonstrated but by the former. Humanity's spirit proves God's spirit, as the one drop of water proves the source from which it must have come. Tell one who has never seen water that there is an ocean of water, and he must accept it on faith or reject it altogether. But let one drop fall upon his hand, and he then has the fact from which all the rest may be inferred. After that he could, by degrees, understand that a boundless and fathomless ocean of water existed. Blind faith would no longer be necessary. He would have supplanted it with knowledge. When one sees mortal man displaying tremendous capabilities, controlling the forces of nature, and opening up to view the world of spirit, the reflective mind is overwhelmed with the conviction that if one man's spiritual ego can do this much, the capabilities of the great Father, Soul, Spirit must be relatively as much vaster than the whole ocean surpasses the single drop in volume and potency. Prove the soul of man by its wondrous powers, and you have proved God's existence. In our studies, mysteries were shown to be no mysteries. Names and places that to the Western mind have only a significance derived from Eastern fable were shown to be realities. Reverently we stepped in spirit within the temple of Isis to lift aside the veil of the one that is and was and shall be. At Sais, to look through the rent curtain of the Sanctum Sanctorum at Jerusalem, and even to interrogate within the crypts which once existed beneath the sacred edifice, the mysterious Bath Kol, the Filia Vocis, the daughter of the divine voice, responded from the mercy seat within the veil, and science, theology, every human hypothesis and conception born of imperfect knowledge, lost forever their authoritative character in our sight. The one living God had spoken through his oracle, humanity, and we were satisfied. Such knowledge is priceless, and it had been hidden only from those who overlooked it, derided it, or denied its existence. From such as these we apprehend criticism, censure, and perhaps hostility, although the obstacles in our way neither spring from the validity or proof, the authenticated facts of history, nor the lack of common sense among the public whom we address. The drift of modern thought is palpably in the direction of liberalism in religion as well as science. Each day brings the reactionists nearer to the point where they must surrender the despotic authority over the public conscience, which they have so long enjoyed and exercised. When the Pope can go to the extreme of fulminating anathemas against all who maintain the liberty of the press and of speech, or who insist that in the conflict of laws, civil and ecclesiastical, the civil law should prevail, or that any method of instruction solely secular may be approved. And Mr. Tyndall, as the mouthpiece of the 19th century science, says, quote, "The impregnable position of science may be stated in a few words. We claim, and we shall wrest from theology, the entire domain of cosmological theory." End quote. The end is not difficult to foresee of lies and dark control. Centuries of subjugation have not quite congealed the lifeblood of men into crystals around the nucleus of blind faith. And the 19th century is witnessing the struggles of the giant as he shakes off the Lilliputian cordage and rises to his feet. Even the Protestant communion of England and America, now engaged in the latest attempt at the revision and translation of the text of its oracles, will be compelled to show the origin and merits of the text itself. The day of domineering over humanity with dogmas has reached its gloaming end. Our work, then, is a plea for the recognition of the Hermetic philosophy, the anciently universal wisdom religion, as the only possible key to the absolute in science and theology. To show that we do not at all conceal from ourselves the gravity of our undertaking, we may say in advance that it would not be strange if the following classes should array themselves against us: the Christians, who will see that we question the evidences of the genuineness of their faith; the scientists, who will find their pretensions placed in the same bundle with those of the Roman Catholic Church for infallibility; and, in certain particulars, the sages and philosophers of the ancient world classed higher than they. Pseudoscientists will, of course, denounce us furiously. The broad churchmen and free thinkers will find that we do not accept what they do, but demand the recognition of the whole truth. Men of letters and PhDs and various authorities who hide their real belief in deference to popular prejudices will run and hide from us. The mercenaries and parasites of the press, who prostitute its more than royal power and dishonor a noble profession, will find it easier to mock at things too wonderful for them to understand. For, to them, the price of a paragraph is more than the value of sincerity. From many will come honest criticism, from many, outright attack. But we hold strong and look to the future. The contest now going on between the party of public conscience and the party of reaction has already developed a healthier tone of thought. It will hardly fail to result ultimately in the overthrow of error and the triumph of truth. We repeat again, we are laboring for the brighter morrow for all humanity. And yet, when we consider the bitter opposition that we are called upon to face, who is better entitled than we, upon entering the arena, to write upon our shield the hail of the Roman gladiator to Caesar. Moriturus te salutat. New York, September 1877. Before the Veil. Quote from Joan in King Henry VI, Act 4. Advance our waving colors on the walls. Quote from J.R. Buchanan, M.D., from Outlines of Lectures on Anthropology. My life has been devoted to the study of man, his destiny, and his happiness. End quote. It is 19 centuries since, as we are told, the night of heathenism and paganism was first dispelled by the divine light of Christianity. And it is 2.5 centuries since the bright lamp of modern science began to shine on the darkness of the ignorance of the ages. Within these respective epochs, we are required to believe the true moral and intellectual progress of the race has occurred. The ancient philosophers were well enough for their respective generations, but they were illiterate as compared with modern men of science, common reasoning goes. Dogmatic assumption of modern science and theology. The ethics of paganism perhaps met the wants of the uncultivated people of antiquity, but not until the advent of the luminous Star of Bethlehem was the true road to moral perfection and the way to salvation made plain. Of old, brutishness was the rule, virtue and spirituality the exception. Now, the dullest may read the will of God in his Bible. Men have every incentive to be good and are constantly becoming better. This is the assumption. But what are the facts? On the one hand, an unspiritual, dogmatic, too often debauched clergy, a host of religious sects and cults, and 3 warring great religions, discord instead of union, dogmas without proofs, sensation-loving preachers, and wealth and pleasure-seeking parishioners, hypocrisy and bigotry, begotten by the tyrannical exigencies of respectability. The rule of the day, sincerity and real piety, is very exceptional. On the other hand, scientific hypotheses built on sand, no accord upon a single question, rancorous quarrels and jealousy, a general drift into materialism, a death grapple of science with theology for infallibility, a conflict of ages. In Rome, the self-styled seat of Christianity, the putative successor to the chair of Peter, is undermining social order with his invisible but omnipresent network of bigoted agents, and incites them to revolutionize Europe for his temporal as well as spiritual supremacy. He who calls himself the Vicar of Christ, fraternizing with the anti-Christian Muslim against another Christian nation, publicly invoking the blessing of God upon the arms of those who have, for centuries, withstood, with fire and sword, the pretensions of his Christ to godhood. and in Berlin, one of the great seats of learning, professors of the modern exact sciences, turning their backs on the boasted results of enlightenment of the post-Galileonian period, are quietly snuffing out the candle of the great Florentine, seeking, in short, to prove the heliocentric system and even the Earth's rotation, but the dreams of deluded scientists, Newton a visionary among them, and all past and present astronomers but clever calculators of unverifiable problems. Between these two conflicting titans, science and theology, is a bewildered public, fast losing all belief in man's personal immortality, in any deity of any kind, and rapidly descending to the level of mere animal existence once again. Such is the picture of the hour, illuminated by the bright noonday sun of this Christian and scientific era. Would it be strict justice to condemn to critical lapidation the most humble and modest of authors for entirely rejecting the authority of both of these combatants? Are we not bound rather to take as the true aphorism of this century the declaration of Horace Greeley, quote, "I accept unreservedly the views of no man, living or dead," end quote. Such, at all events, will be our motto, and we mean that principle to be our constant guide throughout this book. Among the many phenomenal outgrowths of our century, the strange creed of the so-called spiritualists has arisen amid the tottering ruins of self-styled revealed religions and materialistic philosophies. And yet, the spiritualists alone offer a possible last refuge of compromise between the two. That this unexpected ghost of pre-Christian days finds poor welcome from our sober and positive century is not surprising. Times have strangely changed, and it is but recently that a well-known Brooklyn preacher pointedly remarked in a sermon that, could Jesus come back and behave in the streets of New York as he did in those of Jerusalem, he would find himself confined in jail. What sort of welcome, then, could spiritualism ever expect? True enough, the weird stranger seems neither attractive nor promising at first sight. Shapeless and uncouth, like an infant attended by 7 nurses, it is coming out of its teens, lame and mutilated. The name of its enemies is Legion. Its friends and protectors are a handful. But what of that? When was ever truth accepted a priori? Because the champions of spiritualism have, in their fanaticism, magnified its qualities and remained blind to its imperfections. That gives no excuse to doubt its reality. A forgery is impossible when we have no model to forge after. The fanaticism of spiritualists is itself proof of the genuineness and possibility of their phenomenon. They give us facts that we may investigate, not assertions that we must believe without proof. Millions of reasonable men and women do not so easily succumb to collective hallucination. And so, with the clergy following their own interpretations of the Bible, and science following its self-made codex of possibilities in nature, refuse spiritualism a fair hearing, Real science and true religion are silent and gravely wait further developments. The Platonic philosophy affords the only middle ground. The whole question of phenomena rests on the correct comprehension of old philosophies. Whither, then, should we turn in our perplexity but to the ancient sages, since, on the pretext of superstition, we are refused an explanation by the modern people? Let us ask them what they know of genuine science and religion, not in the matter of mere details, but in all the broad conception of these twin truths, so strong in their unity, so weak when divided. Besides, we may find our profit in comparing this boasted modern science with ancient ignorance, this improved modern theology with the secret doctrines of the ancient universal religion. Perhaps we may thus discover a neutral ground whence we can reach and profit by both. It is the Platonic philosophy, the most elaborate compend of the abstruse systems of old India, that can alone afford us this middle ground. Although 22 and a quarter centuries have elapsed since the death of Plato, the great minds of the world are still occupied with his writings. He was, in the fullest sense of the word, humanity's interpreter, and the greatest philosopher of the pre-Christian era mirrored faithfully in his works the spiritualism of the Vedic philosophers who lived thousands of years before himself, and its metaphysical expression. Vyasa, Gemini, Kapila, Virhaspati, Sumati, and so many others will be found to have transmitted their indelible imprint through the intervening centuries upon Plato and his school. Thus is warranted the inference that to Plato and the ancient Hindu sages was alike revealed the same wisdom. So, surviving the shock of time, what can this wisdom be but divine and eternal? Plato taught justice as subsisting in the soul of its possessor and his greatest good. Quote, men, in proportion to their intellect, have admitted his transcendent claims. Unquote. Yet his commentators, almost with one consent, shrink from every passage which implies that his metaphysics are based on a solid foundation and not on ideal conceptions. But Plato could not accept the philosophy destitute of spiritual aspirations. The two were at one with him. For the old Grecian sage, there was a single object of attainment, real knowledge, meaning truth. He considered that to be the only genuine philosophy. And students of truth, who possess the knowledge of the real existence, in opposition to mere seeing, people who study the always truthfully existing in opposition to the transitory phenomena. Philosophers who study that which exists permanently in opposition to that which waxes, wanes, and is developed and destroyed alternately. Quote, Beyond all finite existences and secondary causes, beyond all laws, ideals, and principles, there is an intelligence, or mind, nous, the spirit, the first principle of all principles, the supreme idea on which all other ideas are grounded, the monarch and lawgiver of the universe, the ultimate substance from which all things derive their being and essence, the first cause of all order, harmony, beauty, excellency, and goodness which prevails in the universe, who is called, by way of preeminence and excellence, the supreme good, the God over all. End quote. He is not the truth nor the intelligence, but the Father of it. Though this eternal essence of things may not be perceptible by our physical senses, it may be apprehended by the mind of those who are not willfully obtuse. To you, said Yeshua ben Joseph to his elect disciples, it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to them it is not given. Therefore speak I to them in parables or allegories, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. End quote. The philosophies of Plato, we are assured by the Neoplatonic school, was taught and illustrated in the Platonic mysteries. Many have questioned and even denied this, and Lobeck, in his Aglaophomus, has gone to the extreme of representing the sacred orgies as little more than an empty show to captivate the imagination. As though Athens and Greece would, for 20 centuries and more, have repaired every 5th year to Eleusis to witness a solemn religious farce. Augustine, the papal bishop of Hippo, has resolved such assertions. He declares that the doctrines of the Alexandrian Platonists were the original esoteric doctrines of the first followers of Plato, and describes Plotinus as Plato resuscitated. He also explains the motives of the great philosopher for veiling the interior sense of what he taught. As to the myths, Plato declares in the Gorgias and the Phaedon that they were the vehicles of great truths well worth the seeking. But commentators are so little en rapport with the great philosopher as to be compelled to acknowledge that they are ignorant where the doctrine ends and the myth begins. Plato put to flight the popular superstition concerning magic and demons, and developed the exaggerated notions of the time into rational theories and metaphysical concepts. Perhaps these would not stand the inductive method of reasoning established by Aristotle. Nevertheless, they are satisfactory in the highest degree to those who apprehend the existence of that higher faculty of insight or intuition. Nevertheless, they are satisfactory in the highest degree to those who apprehend the existence of the higher faculty of insight or intuition as affording a criterion for ascertaining truth. Bashing all Plato's doctrines upon the presence of the Supreme Mind, Plato taught that the nous, spirit, or rational soul of humanity, being generated by the divine Mother, Father, Creator, possessed a nature kindred or even homogeneous with the divinity, and was capable of beholding the eternal realities. This faculty of contemplating reality in a direct and immediate manner belongs to God alone. The aspiration for this knowledge constitutes what is really meant by philosophy, the love of wisdom. The love of truth is inherently the love of goodness, and so predominating over every desire of the soul, purifying it and assimilating it to the divine, thus governing every act of the individual, it raises humanity to a participation and communion with divinity, and restores him to the likeness of God. This flight, says Plato, consists in becoming godlike, and this assimilation is the becoming just and holy and equal with eternal truth and wisdom. The basis of this assimilation is always asserted to be the pre-existence of the spirit, the soul, the nous. In the allegory of the chariot and the winged steeds, given in Phaedrus, he represents the physical nature as composite and twofold: the thumos, the epithumetic part, formed from the substances of the world of phenomena, and the kumoidev thumoides, the essence of which is linked to the eternal world. The present earth life is a fall and potentially a punishment. The soul dwells in the grave which we call the body, and in its incorporate state, and previous to the discipline of education, the noetic or spiritual element is asleep. Life is thus a dream rather than a reality. Like the captives in the subterranean cave described in Plato's Republic, the back is turned to the light. We perceive only the shadows of objects and think of them to be the actual reality. Is not this the idea of Maya, or the illusion of the senses in physical life, which is so marked a feature in Buddhistic philosophy? But these shadows, if we have not given ourselves up absolutely to the sensuous nature, arouse in us the reminiscence of that higher world that we once inhabited. The interior spirit has some dim and shadowy recollection of its antenatal state of bliss, and some instinctive and proleptic yearnings for its return. It is the province of the discipline of philosophy to disenthrall it from the bondage of senses and raise it into the empyrean of pure thought, to the vision of eternal truth, goodness, and beauty. The soul, says Plato, cannot come into the form of a body if it has never seen the truth. This is a recollection of those things which our soul formerly saw when journeying with the deity, despising the things which we now say are, and looking up to that which really is. Therefore, only the soul or the spirit of the philosopher or student of the highest truth is furnished with wings, because he, to the best of his ability, keeps these things in mind, of which the contemplation renders even deity itself divine. By making the right use of these things remembered from the former life, by constantly perfecting himself in the perfect mysteries, a man becomes truly perfect, an initiate into the diviner wisdom. End quote. Hence we may understand why the sublimer scenes in the Platonic mysteries were always in the night. The life of the interior spirit is the death of the external nature, and the night of the physical world denotes the day of the spiritual. Dionysus, the night sun, is therefore worshipped rather than Helios, the orb of day. In the mysteries were symbolized the pre-existent condition of the spirit and soul, and the lapse of the latter into earth life and Hades, the miseries of that life. The purification of the soul and its restoration to divine bliss, meaning reunion with spirit. Theron of Smyrna aptly compares the philosophical discipline to the mystic rites. Philosophy, says he, may be called the initiation into the true arcana and the instruction of the genuine mysteries. There are 5 parts to this initiation. 1. The previous purification. 2. Being admitted to the participation in the arcane rites. 3. The epoptic revelation. 4. The investiture or enthroning. And 5. The 5th, which is produced from all of these, is friendship and interior communion with God, and the enjoyment of that felicity which arises from intimate converse with divine beings. The quote continues, Plato denominates the epopteia, or personal view, the perfect contemplation of things which are apprehended intuitively, absolute truths and ideas. Plato also considers the binding of the head and crowning as analogous to the authority which any one receives from his instructors of leading others into the same contemplation. The 5th gradation is the most perfect felicity arising from hence, and, according to Plato, an assimilation to divinity as far as is possible to human beings. End quote. Review of the ancient philosophical system. Such is Platonism. Quote, out of Plato, says Ralph Waldo Emerson, come all things that are still written and debated among all men of thought. End quote. He absorbed the learning of his times, of Greece, from Philolaus to Socrates, then of Pythagoras in Italy, then what he could procure from Egypt and the East. He was so broad that all philosophy, European and Asiatic, was in his doctrines, and to culture and contemplate, he added the nature and qualities of the poet. The followers of Plato generally adhered strictly to his psychological theories as well. Several, however, like Xenocrates, ventured into even bolder speculations. Speusippus, the nephew and successor of the great philosopher, was the author of the Numerical Analysis, a treatise on the Pythagorean numbers. Some of his speculations are not found in written dialogues, but as he was a listener to the unwritten lectures of Plato, the judgment of Unveiled is doubtless correct, that he did not differ from his master. He was evidently, though not named, the antagonist whom Aristotle criticized when professing to cite the argument of Plato against the doctrine of Pythagoras, that all things were in themselves numbers, or rather inseparable from the idea of numbers. He especially endeavored to show that the Platonic doctrine of ideas differed essentially from the Pythagorean, in that it presupposed numbers and magnitudes to exist apart from things. He also asserted that Plato taught that there could be no real knowledge if the object of that knowledge was not carried beyond or above the sensible. But Aristotle was not trustworthy as a witness. He misrepresented Plato, and he almost caricatured the doctrines of Pythagoras. There is a canon of interpretation which should guide us in our examinations of every philosophical opinion. Quote, "The human mind has, under the necessary operation of its own laws, been compelled to entertain the same fundamental ideas, and the human heart to cherish the same feelings in all ages." End quote. It is certain that Pythagoras awakened the deepest intellectual sympathy of his age, and that his doctrines exerted a powerful influence upon the mind of Plato. His cardinal idea was that there existed a permanent principle of unity beneath the forms, changes, and other phenomena of the visible universe. Aristotle asserted that he taught that numbers are the first principle of all entities. Ritter has expressed the opinion that the formula of Pythagoras should be taken symbolically, which is doubtless correct. Aristotle goes on to associate these numbers with the forms and ideas of Plato. He even declares that Plato said forms are numbers, and that ideas are substantial existences, real beings. Yet Plato did not so teach. He declared that the final and first cause was the supreme goodness, God. Quote, "Ideas are objects of pure conception for the human reason, and they are attributes of the divine reason." End quote. Nor did Plato ever say that forms are numbers. What he did say may be found in one of his works. Quote, "God formed things as they first arose, according to forms and numbers and ratio." It is recognized by modern science that all the higher laws of nature assume the form of quantitative statement. This is perhaps a fuller elaboration or more explicit affirmation of the Pythagorean doctrine. Numbers were regarded as the best representations of the laws of harmony which pervade the cosmos. We know, too, that in chemistry the doctrine of atoms and the laws of combination are actual and, as it were, arbitrarily defined by numbers. As Mr. W. Archer Butler has expressed it, quote, "The world is then, through all its departments, a living arithmetic in its development, a realized geometry in its repose." End quote. The key to the Pythagorean dogmas is the general formula of unity in multiplicity, the one evolving the many and pervading the many. Even the Apostle Paul accepted that as true. Out of him and through him and in him are all things. This, as we can see by the following quote, is purely Hindu and Brahmanical. Quote, "When the dissolution, pralaya, had arrived at its ending, the great being, Para-Atma or Para-Purusha, the Lord existing through himself, out of whom and through whom all things came to be, all things are, and all things will ever be, resolved to emanate from his own substance the various creatures." From the Mana Dharma Sastra, Book 1. The mystic decad 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10 is a way of expressing this idea. The one is God, the two is physical matter. The three combines the monad and the duad, and partaking of the nature of both is the phenomenal world, the tetrad, or form of perfection, expresses the emptiness of all, and the decad, or sum of all, involves the entire cosmos. The universe is the combination of 1,000 elements, and yet the expression of a single spirit, a chaos to the senses, a cosmos to the reason. The whole of this combination of the progression of numbers in the idea of creation is Hindu in origin. The being existed through himself. Swayambhu or Swayambhuva, as he is called by some, is one. He emanates from himself, the creative faculty, Brahma, or Purusha, the divine male, and the one becomes two. Out of this duad, union of the purely intellectual principle with the principle of matter involves necessarily a third, which is Viraj, the phenomenal world. It is out of this invisible and incomprehensible trinity, the Brahmanic Trimurti, that evolves the second triad, which represents the three faculties, the creative, the conservative, and the destructive or transformative. These are typified as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, but are again and ever blended into one. Unity, Brahma, or as the Vedas call him, Trindandi, is the God triply manifested, which gave rise to the symbolical Aum, or the abbreviated Trimurti. It is but under this trinity, ever active and tangible to all our senses, that the invisible and unknown monath can manifest itself to the world of mortals. When he becomes Sarira, or he who puts on a visible form, He typifies all the principles of matter, all the germs of life. He is Purusha, the god of the three visages, or triple power, the essence of the Vedic triad. Let the Brahmas know the sacred syllable Aum and the 3 words of the Savitri, and read the Vedas daily, is a quote. Another. After having produced the universe, he whose power is incomprehensible vanished again, absorbed in the Supreme Soul. Having retired into the primitive darkness, the Great Soul remains within the unknown and is void of all form. Continuing the quote, when having again reunited the subtle elementary principles, it introduces itself into either a vegetable or animal seed. It assumes at each a new form. Continuing the quote, it is thus that, by alternative waking and rest, the immutable being causes to revive and die eternally all the existing creatures, active and inert. From the Manu, Book 1. He who has studied Pythagoras and his speculations on the monad, which, after having emanated from the duad, retires into silence and darkness, and thus creates the triad, can realize whence came the philosophy of the great Samian sage, and after him that of Socrates and then Plato. Spusiupus seems to have taught that the psychical or thumetic soul was immortal, as well as the spirit or rational soul, and further on we will show his reasons. He, like Philolaus and Aristotle in his disquisitions upon the soul, makes of ether an element, so that there were 5 principal elements to correspond with the 5 regular figures in geometry. This became also a doctrine of the Alexandrian school. Indeed, there was much in the doctrines of the Philalethians which did not appear in the works of the older Platonists, but was doubtless taught in substance by the philosopher himself, but with his usual reticence was not committed to writing down as being too arcane for promiscuous publication. Spusiupus and Xenocrates after Plato held, like their great master, that the anima mundi, or world soul, was not the deity itself, but a manifestation of it. Those philosophers never conceived of the One as an animate nature. The original One did not exist as we understand the term to mean. Not until he had united with the many, emanated existence, the monad and duad, was a being produced. The Tivmion, honored, the something manifested, dwells in the center as in the circumference, but it is only in the reflection of the deity, the world soul. In this doctrine we find the spirit of esoteric Buddhism. A man's idea of God is that image of blinding light that he sees reflected in the concave mirror of his own soul, and yet this is not, in very truth, God, but only his reflection. His glory is there, yes, but it is the light of his own spirit that the man sees, and it is all he can bear to look upon, his own light of his own soul. The clearer the mirror, the brighter will be the divine image. But the external world cannot be witnessed in it at the same moment. In the ecstatic yogi, in the illuminated seer, the spirit will shine like the noonday sun. In the debased victim of earthly attraction, the radiance has disappeared, for the mirror is obscured with the stains of matter. Such men deny their God, and would willingly deprive humanity of soul with one destructive blow. No God, no soul? Dreadful, annihilating thought! The maddening nightmare of a lunatic, the true atheist, presenting before his fevered vision a hideous, ceaseless procession of sparks of cosmic matter created by no one, self-appearing, self-existence, and self-developing, this self no self, for it is nothing and nobody, floating onward from nowhere. It is propelled by no cause, for there is none, and it rushes to nowhere. And this is a circle of eternity, blind, inert, and pointless. What is even the erroneous conception of the Buddhistic nirvana in comparison? Reaching a state of nirvana is preceded by countless spiritual transformations and metapsychoses, during which the entity loses not for a second the sense of its own individuality, and which may last for millions of ages before the final state of no thing is reached. Though some have considered Speusippus as inferior to Aristotle, the world is nevertheless indebted to him for defining and expounding many things that Plato had left obscure in his doctrine of the sensible and ideal. His maxim was, "The immaterial is known by means of scientific thought, the material by scientific perception." Xenocrates expounded many of the unwritten theories of his teachings of his master. He too held the Pythagorean doctrine, the system of numerals and mathematics, in the highest estimation. Recognizing but 3 degrees of knowledge, thought, perception, and intuition, he made the former busy itself with all that which is beyond the heavens, perception with things in the heavens, and intuition with the heavens themselves. We find again these theories, and nearly in the same language, in the book the Manava Dharma Sastra. When speaking of the creation of man, it is said, "The Supreme Deity drew from his own essence the immortal breath which perisheth not in the being, and to this soul of the being he gave the ahankara, the conscience of the ego, as a sovereign guide. And then he gave to that soul of the being, humanity, the intellect formed of the 3 qualities, and the 5 organs of outward perception." End quote. These three qualities are intelligence, conscience, and will, answering to the thought, perception, and intuition, as described by Xenocrates. The relation of numbers to ideas was developed by him further than by Speusippus, and he surpassed Plato in his definition of the doctrine of indivisible magnitudes. Reducing them to their ideal primary elements, he demonstrated that every figure and form originated out of the smallest indivisible line. That Xenocrates held the same theories as Plato in relation to the human soul, supposed to be a number, is evident, though Aristotle contradicts this, like every other teaching of this philosopher. This is very conclusive evidence that many of Plato's doctrines were delivered orally, even were it shown that Xenocrates, and not Plato, was the first to originate the theory of indivisible magnitudes. He derives the soul from the first duad and calls it a self-moved number. He built upon it the cosmological doctrine and proved the necessary existence in every part of the universal space of a successive and progressive series of animated and thinking through spiritual beings. The human soul for him is a compound of the most spiritual properties of the monad and the duad, possessing the highest principles of both. If, like Plato and Prodicus, he refers to the elements as to divine powers and calls them gods, neither himself nor others connected any anthropomorphic idea with the appellation. The philosopher Christian remarks that he called them gods only that these elementary powers should not be confounded with the demons of the netherworld, the elementary spirits. As the soul of the world permeates the whole cosmos, even beasts must have in them something divine. This also is the doctrine of the Buddhists and the Hermeticists, that God endows with a living soul even the plants and the tiniest blade of grass. The demons, according to this theory, are intermediate beings between the divine perfection and human sinfulness, and he divides them into classes, each subdivided by many others. But he states expressly that the individual or personal soul is the leading guardian demon of every man, and that no demon has more power over us than our own soul. Thus, the daimonion of Socrates is the god or divine entity which inspired him all his life. It depends on man either to open or close his perception to the divine voice. Like Speusippus, he ascribed immortality to the physical body or irrational soul. But some Hermetic philosophers have taught that the soul has a separate, continued existence only so long as its passage through the spheres of any material or earthly particles, and that when absolutely purified, all physical particles are annihilated, and the quintessence of that soul alone becomes blended with its divine spirit, and the two become one again. The philosopher Zeller states that Xenocrates forbade the eating of animal flesh, not because he saw in beasts something akin to humanity, as he described to them a dim consciousness of God, but for the opposite reason, lest the irrationality of animal souls might thereby obtain a certain influence over us. But we believe that it was rather because, like Pythagoras, he had had the Hindu sages for his masters and models. The Roman Cicero depicted Xenocrates utterly despising everything except the highest virtue, and describes the stainlessness and severe austerity of his character. Quote, "To free ourselves from the subjection of sensuous existence, to conquer the titanic elements in our terrestrial nature through the Divine One, is our problem," Zeller makes him out to say. Purity, even in the secret longings of our heart, is the greatest duty, and only philosophy and the initiation into the mysteries help toward the attainment of this object. Crantor, another philosopher associated with the earliest days of Plato's Academy, conceived the human soul as formed out of the primary substance of all things, the monad or one, and the duad or the two. Plutarch speaks at length of this philosopher, who, like his master, believed in souls being distributed in earthly bodies as an exile and punishment. Heraclides, though some critics do not believe him to have strictly adhered to Plato's primal philosophy, taught the same ethics. Zeller presents him to us, imparting the Pythagorean doctrine of the diurnal rotation of the earth and the immobility of the fixed stars, but added that he was ignorant of the annual revolution of the earth around the sun and of the heliocentric perspective. But we have good evidence that the latter system was taught in the Platonic mysteries, and that Socrates died for atheism, i.e., divulging this sacred knowledge that the earth moved around the sun. Heraclides adopted fully the Pythagorean and Platonic views of the human soul, its faculties and its capabilities. He described it as luminous, a highly ethereal essence. He affirms that souls inhabit the Milky Way before descending into physicality. His demons or spirits are airy and vaporous bodies. In the Epinomis is fully stated the doctrine of the Pythagorean numbers in relation to creation. As a true Platonist, its author maintains that wisdom can only be attained by a thorough inquiry into the occult nature of creation. It alone assures us an existence of bliss after death. The immortality of the soul is greatly speculated upon in this treatise, but its author adds that we can attain to this knowledge only through a complete comprehension of the numbers. For the man, unable to distinguish the straight line from a curved one, will never have wisdom enough to secure a mathematical demonstration of the invisible. Therefore, we must assure ourselves of the objective existence of our soul and astral body before we learn that we are in possession of a divine and immortal spirit. Iamblichus says the same thing, adding, moreover, that it is a secret belonging to the highest initiation. The idea that numbers possess a great virtue, produce always what is good and never what is evil, refers to justice, equanimity of temper, and everything that is harmonious. When the author speaks of every star as an individual soul, he only means what the Hindu initiates and the Hermeticists taught before and after him, being that every star is an independent planet which, like our Earth, has a soul of its own, every atom of matter being impregnated with the divine influx of the soul of the world. It breathes and lives. It feels and suffers as well as enjoys life in its own way. What naturalist is prepared to dispute it on good evidence? Therefore, we must consider the celestial bodies as the images of gods, as partaking of the divine powers in their substance, and though they are not immortal in their soul entity, their agency in the economy of the universe is entitled to divine honors, such as we pay to minor gods. The idea is plain, and one must be malevolent indeed to misrepresent it. If the author of Epinomis places these fiery gods higher than the animals, plants, and even mankind, all of which, as earthly creatures, are assigned by him to therefore a lower place, who can prove him wholly wrong? One must needs go deep indeed into the profundity of the abstract metaphysics of the old philosophies, who would understand that their various embodiments of their conceptions are, after all, based upon an identical apprehension of the nature of the first cause, its attributes and method. Again, when the author Epinomis locates between these highest and lowest gods, embodied souls, three classes of demons, and peoples the universe with invisible beings, he is more rational than our modern scientists, who make between the two extremes one vast hiatus of being, the playground of blind forces. Of these three classes, the first two are invisible. Their bodies are pure ether and fire, planetary spirits. The demons of the third class are clothed with vapory bodies. They are usually invisible, but sometimes make themselves more solid to become visible for a few seconds. These are the earthly spirits, or our astral souls. It is these doctrines which, studied analogically and on the principle of correspondence, led the ancient and may now lead the modern philosophers step by step towards the solution of the greatest mysteries. On the brink of the dark chasm separating the spiritual from the physical world stands modern science, with eyes closed and head averted, pronouncing the gulf impassable and bottomless, though she holds in her hand a torch which she need only lower into the depths to show her her mistake. But across this chasm, the patient student of Hermetic philosophy has constructed a bridge. In his Fragments of Science, Tyndall makes the following sad confession, quote, "If you ask me whether science has solved or is likely in our day to solve the problem of this universe, I must shake my head in doubt." End quote. If moved by an afterthought, he corrects himself later and assures his audience that experimental evidence has helped him to discover the promise and potency of every quality of life. It would be as difficult for Professor Tyndall to offer any ultimate and irrefutable proofs of what he asserts as it was for Job to insert a hook into the nose of the Leviathan. To avoid confusion that might easily arise by the frequent employment of certain terms in a sense different from that familiar to the reader, a few explanations will be timely. We desire to leave no pretext, either for misunderstanding or misrepresentation. Magic may have one signification to one class of readers and another to another class. We shall give it the meaning which it has in the minds of its Oriental students and practitioners. And so with the words Hermetic science, occultism, hierophant, adept, sorcerer, etc., there has been little agreement of late as to their meanings. Though the distinctions between the terms are often very insignificant, merely ethnic, still it may be useful to the general reader to know just what that is. We will give a few definitions alphabetically in the next segment.